Hi, everyone. My name's Peter Drake. I'm the provost at the New York Academy of Art, and welcome to our fall lecture series. Tonight, we're very excited to have Sandro Kopp join us, but I also wanted to make it clear that this is the first in-person lecture that we have had for 2 years, so woohoo! Well done, New York Academy of Art. Just a brief intro to Sandro. He's a painter based in the Scottish Highlands. He collaborated with Wes Anderson on creating all the paintings of Moses Rosenthaler for the current film, The French Dispatch. He's worked on numerous other movies, including Bong Joon-ho's Okja, where he was part of the creature design team as well as a co-producer. His work explores various modes of figurative painting and drawing that are not based on photographs. He pioneered drawing and painting from live video chat sessions in 2009. Little did we know we'd all be doing that sooner or later. His work is in many noteworthy collections worldwide and has been shown among many other places like Lehman Mopin in New York, Victoria Moreau in London, Palazzo Grimani Museum in Venice, and the Sammlung Friedrichshof in Vienna. So please welcome Sandro. So Sandro has many bodies of work that you can explore online on his website, but there are a handful here that we want to talk about, and Sandro made it very clear to me from the very beginning that he wants this to be conversational. So the more that you jump in, the more that you participate. If you have any questions, you don't have to wait to the end of our conversation to do that, but just jump in and have fun. One of the first bodies of work that I did want to talk about were the eye paintings, because they were so unusual in many ways, and one of the things that occurred to me when I was looking at them is that you think of painting somebody's eye as being sort of the window into their soul, but I also noticed that you're frequently reflected in their eye, and so it really becomes a double portrait, and I wondered if that was an important feature of it for you, that it was essentially also about your relationship with the sitter.
Yes, absolutely, and I brought one today. As I was leaving the apartment, I was sort of feeling a little bit nervous about talking to a room full of friendly faces and thought, for company, I'll bring Tony. He's right here. He was sitting on the counter, and I just thought that'll be a nice thing to have with me. And that's the way that the eyes work for me. It's really about company and also about the atmosphere. Like sometimes I've painted someone multiple times, and each one has the moment and the environment in which it was painted very much as part of the piece. Whether anyone else gets that from it, I don't know. That's the way it works for me, and I love having them around. I'm always, as with many of you will know, when you sell something you really like, it kind of sucks. So with the eyes, I'm happy to keep a lot of them around. And this is Tony Rivolori, who plays the young Rosenthaler in The French Dispatch. He's a friend of mine I've known for years, and he's just this super mellow dude and a good friend. And also, we painted it in the Garrett set in Angoulême, so you can see the heater reflected in the side there. It was in this sort of dark room, and just thought it felt like a good thing to have here as an object, because at the end of the day, making art is about making the object. The image is kind of secondary in a way.
Well, I was wondering about that too, because there are many different environments that appears to be painted in. So I didn't know if you were painting them, in their living spaces, or if they were coming to your studio, or if you preferred that it actually take place in their own home, in their own environment.
I travel a lot, and one of the things about the eyes that's good is that they're very portable. So they're not only small, but also I don't paint right up to the edge, so you can stack these in your suitcase. And I frequently have had like half a dozen eyes with me, and they're oil paintings, but you can have them drying because the back of it doesn't go all the way around. So I've painted them in people's flats and houses. I've painted them in the park once, in Regent's Park in London, when Google Maps sent me on a wild goose chase, and someone just met me there, and we just did it on a park bench. And that really feeds into the resulting piece. I think the place is as much the subject as the sitter is.
Yeah. I mean, it also lends itself, just, I was thinking about the fluidity of the eye when you're looking at it. It just has all this sort of gorgeous reflective quality, and it seems to play into your natural painting talent, just, this sort of open form, gestural approach to painting. It seems to come more from the Sorolla or even the London school to a certain extent. Was that part of what attracted you to this subject, or? I
love portraits, and when you look at a portrait, generally the first thing you look at are the eyes, and so in a way my collection of eyes, somewhere here, we should have this thing going because there's eyes, and it was like a greatest hits compilation tape. So if you have a bunch of eyes, that's the mix of different kind of best-ofs from the portraits, but also looking at a portrait that's very highly worked, it kind of answers all the questions a lot of the time right there and then, whereas with the eye you leave a lot more open to, you leave the door open to mystery. It's kind of more, you have to imagine what's the rest of that face look like, and so I like the way in which it didn't give away too much, but you could still apply super high detail, every eyelash and reflections in the eyes and all of that to the, there you go. This is one of the exhibitions of the eyes that I had at the Sammlung Friedrichshof in Vienna in May this year, just after they opened up from lockdown. Then you'll see, I'm not going to look at the behind myself the whole time, but there was the show at the Grimani Museum in Venice, where I collaborated with an architect from Florida who made this kind of modernist installation where they were all at different levels, so as you moved around the room, they kind of moved against each other. And did you design that installation? I was curious about it, because it does have a very sort of reductive quality to it. They're very sort of elemental somehow. No, it was Alberto, but of course we talked about it a lot beforehand and figured out what we could do. The initial impulse was born out of the fact that it's a 16th century palazzo and you can't put nails in the wall because there's frescoes all around, so we had to do something that was away from the wall, and then if you're going to be building stands, how do you make those stands more interesting? And he's a huge follower of Carlo Scarpa, who's a big Venetian kind of museum installation guy and amazing architect, and so it was sort of an homage to Scarpa. It's funny, just a few minutes ago we were talking a little bit about your drawing practice, and I just assumed from how many drawings you have and just how graceful they are and how inventive they are that it would be a really important part of your practice. But it sounds like it's not that it isn't central, but it sounds like it's not like you're drawing every day. Kinda. I mean, it's not practice in the sense of I'm doing it to practice something else, but I love drawing, and I consider myself probably a draftsman first over a painter, and that's sort of what I started out with doing. My dad was an architect, and I would steal his pens and kind of be doing dinosaurs and aliens, and never really stopped. And I still love drawing as much as possible, both abstract and particularly life drawing in nudes, and that was kind of my first life drawing session when I was 17 or something. I had this very strong sense that that was what I was going to do with the rest of my life, and so far I haven't stopped. Well, it's really interesting to me too that you use a lot of superimposition and layering in your drawings. I mean, here's a great example of it, and I just wonder how you approach them compositionally. Does it just sort of evolve, or is there a gesture that you note and then want to find and repeat inside of the composition? How do you go about your drawings? Well, it starts out very, very freeform. This was a dancer friend of mine who was literally moving the whole time while I was drawing her. And these were all done on Zoom, by the way, since we're going to be talking about the Skype stuff eventually. I think these were all done online with the sitter moving or posing for me. And you can start out, because there's a lot of room on the page, and then as you go along and things become more layered up, you have to make more decisions. But at the end of the day, it's about finding rhythms, because there are so many rhythms within the shapes of the body that kind of repeat. And if you can fit those into each other, these macroorganisms emerge from layering up different parts of the bodies, and sometimes different bodies as well.
Well, I was thinking of it because you compose right to left, left to right, top to bottom, bottom to top, but also in and out, and that's such a wonderful experience when you're looking at them, just this sense that you're composing in 3D in a strange way. Really beautiful. I mean, it's funny because we've had dancers here before and had students drawing from the dancers, and my wife Janice was talking about this earlier. Some people just fall apart when they're faced with the idea of recording something that's just not standing still. It's just so frustrating for some people. But it seems to be something that you really love and look for in your work.
Yes, and it's, well, again, we were talking about this before, and I think there's a very, there's a lot of figurative art around at the moment, and there's a great dominance of working from photographs. How many of you guys are painters, and how many of you work from photographs? Quite a few, yeah. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I mean, so many people have done sensational work working from photographs, but I just think that particularly nowadays that camera-based images are omnipresent everywhere. There's something quite worthwhile about looking at what is it that we can see and perceive and try and make into something that is different from what we see in a photograph when we're making a figurative piece of art. And that's something that I do. I'll work from photographs, but only if I've had the live sitting first. I'll work from screenshots from my Skype stuff, but the presence comes first. It's about the presence. And then everything that follows after that is secondary, and the photograph is kind of a aide-mémoire to get you to remember that moment of presence, of being in the room or being on the call with that person.
I think one of the problems that a lot of people who work from photographs have is getting away from the photograph. It becomes this sort of prison where it's like you're trapped in its reality as opposed to using it as an interpretive tool. I've always felt like, for me, there was very little benefit in just replicating a photograph, absolutely. It was just, for me, a point of departure. And I like the idea that it's something that you can use almost to sort of remind yourself of what the in-person experience was like. I did want to ask you about the Skype project, though, because you did that back in 2009, and I don't know anybody that was really, there's lots of online, educational courses and things like that, but what was your interest in that? What was, if you were seeing it as sort of like a 2.5D kind of experience? Like somewhere between. It started
out as a experiment, and my very first Skype painting from 2009 is floating around somewhere in the background. It's Warris with the turban and the beard. He's a friend of mine, and we've been painting together for a very, very long time. And we were chatting anyway, and I sort of thought, oh, well, let's do a painting. And then that painting hung on the wall, and I just kept catching it out of the corner of my eye and going, wow, there's something really interesting there. And so I did another one, and then another one, and then very quickly realized at that time, when being able to chat to someone and see them in real time was super cutting edge. Nowadays, everyone has FaceTime in their pocket, but it was very exciting also for someone like me who lives very internationally. A lot of my family's in New Zealand, a lot of my family's in Germany, some of my family's in America. I'm kind of spread around the globe. So I used it anyway, and I thought there was something quite worthwhile about looking at how something that new and digital would combine with something as old-fashioned and sort of fuddy-duddy as oil-painted portraits. And so I did a lot of them also using the visual distortions that were more common back then. Nowadays, cameras and internet connections have become a lot better. But back in the day, you had these like instant Francis Bacons when things turned turquoise suddenly and sort of someone's face was over here. And I'd try and catch that and put it into it. So it was both a visual and a conceptual hook to hang the painting on.
There was one in particular, I think, called Ellie, that struck me because it looked like it was made by an entirely different artist. And I was wondering, what was it about that particular session that sort of turned on a different light bulb for you?
Oh, well, she really loves 80s stuff, and she had this pink light, and that's just, I think possibly it's the colors that were the different thing for you. It was just a normal Skype sitting. There's nothing else that was out of the ordinary in it.
Oh, it just looked like you got an electrical jolt or something like that, because it's a very different language that you were using. But interesting that it would sort of, that experience would allow
It's
for
me. In the mirror,
There's
on
always
the
a double
screen,
word.
behind. So this is another Skype one that I did of my friend Chris. And you have the color of the screen reflected.
Well, I'm sure everybody's thrilled to find out how the French Dispatch came about and how long your relationship with Anderson is. And can you just tell us a little bit about, first of all, how the project came about and, maybe what effect it's had on your studio practice?
Yes, Wes has been a friend of mine for some years now, and he's been around my work quite a lot. He's got quite a bit of my work from various different exhibitions and things that I've done. And so he knew that I was up for doing both abstract things and figurative things. And in the story, I don't know how many of you guys have seen the movie The French Dispatch, but there's...
All right, that's a start.
Time to go back to the cinema. But Moses Rosenthaler goes from being a figurative artist to being a very abstract artist, but still with the figure in there. And Wes just said, do you want to do these paintings? I think his email said, they're going to be very, very heavily featured in the film. And I was like, yeah, even if they're not, I'll do them, sure. And it was pretty last minute. I started working on them in the beginning of November 2018. And then we shot them beginning or middle of January 2019. So I had 2.5, 3 months to paint these 10 5 by 10 foot paintings that needed to look like a genius had worked on them for 3 years. So no challenge there. And it was really exciting and really, really fun. And
part of this is so fascinating to me because I know that you've made note of the fact that, you're interested in de Kooning, you're interested in Bacon, you're interested in, these artists that could have been referenced, but it can't look like anybody else's work, right? That's an important aspect of this. It's not just that you're making a lot of really beautiful paintings, but they have to hold up on their own as the work of a genius. Like, talk about pressure. That's insane.
And the work of someone who's his own thing, who isn't just copying something else, yes.
Right, yeah. I mean, but on top of that, there was all of this sort of technical experimentation that had to happen too, because you were talking about the viscosity of the paint and a certain kind of stretching quality that you wanted to have in it. Can you talk a little bit about that process and, how long did it take before you were actually making paintings?
Yes, it was a month or so before we got into the big ones because we were testing before that. And at this point, I have to give a huge shout out to my two assistant Rosenthaler painters, Edith Baudraud and Sian Smith, who was a graduate of this very illustrious institution in which we all are. She is an absolute gem, and I couldn't have done it without those two, and they really helped. And we mixed up this type of paint that involved various kinds of acrylic and binders and plaster and glues that kind of created the stringiness that you would get in oil paint, but then also cracked very quickly, and we wanted it to crack quickly in order to have that element of time in there so that you could layer it up and it would look like he'd painted wet over dry and things had kind of gone wrong. And Wes, I had made all kinds of sketches and designs of the composition based on what it said in the script, what it was going to be, and then came excitedly to Angoulême and showed them to Wes, and he was like, yeah, that's fine. put them away. Now we're going to just paint flesh. And he said, paint a sort of little panel of flesh. And so I did that, and he said, great, now do it again, slightly differently. This time use only geometric shapes. Okay, fine, now do it again. Now make every mark in the same place 10 times over. Fine.
And you were communicating multiple times every day, right? There was
Yes.
This wasn't like just send you off to a corner, make a body of work, and we'll film it afterwards.
Luckily, this was during pre-production, so he wasn't shooting. When he's shooting, you usually don't get a response till the end of the day, but he would get back to me usually within a minute. And I was one of hundreds of people with whom that was the case, I think. And there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of very, very precise feedback, and then sometimes also very general feedback. There were all kinds of ideas that we involved. At the beginning, I remember there was a lot of talk of fire being one of the things that was used in the paintings because he wanted them to have this kind of explosive quality. And so we ended up blow-torching the paintings and putting shellac on them and lighting it on fire and doing all kinds of experiments that in the end didn't work. So we stuck with just doing paintings.
Yeah.
There were lots of failed experiments, which is the good thing about experiments, they can fail, and then you end up with something that works. And so finally I kind of did, after I would say 3 weeks, I did a square where he was like, yeah, this works, now do a big one in the actual size, and that became the first of the 10. And then in the end, I actually had enough time to do an 11th one so that there was one that we could deselect and get rid of in the end so that we had only the best ones.
And who ends up owning the paintings?
The production.
Oh, they do?
Yeah,
Really?
they
All
have
of
them. They're currently on show in London at 180 The Strand, which was supposed to come down this weekend, but I've just heard it's going to be extended, and I'm going to get to see it because I didn't get to go to my own show because I was over here, and COVID regulations mean that you can't travel so freely.
But you did more paintings than were actually shown in the film, correct?
Many, 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 many more, yes.
Do you know how many more?
I haven't counted, but of the big ones, there was just one extra. Of all the test panels, there would, I would say, a few dozen of Simone Naked Cell Block J Hobby Room, which is the small painting that kind of kicks off the whole story and is the catalyst for everything that goes on. I did 9 versions before we shot it, and then the one that was in the film that Wes selected was not my favorite, and so when I saw the finished product, I said, all the big ones are great, but that one I'm not 100% sure about. And he said, well, if you can come up with something better, this is it. If you can come up with something better, I like this one, but be my guest. I'll replace it in the film. It's a square on screen, very easily replaced digitally nowadays. So I spent a year trying to come up with a better painting than that one, and didn't. But as a result, now have a large show's worth of those paintings, which I'm going to be showing in Berlin in February. And it was very exciting. And I'm still continuing to work in that manner. I
did want to ask you about that. So your work changed dramatically in the course of, providing work for this film, but it sounds like you were really basically just told to go into the studio and create, right? It doesn't sound like you were getting direction so much.
No, I think I did get quite a lot of direction, luckily, which was a good thing because I'm very comfortable in, I always consider myself as a bit of a filter, like whether it's looking at a sitter and filtering my perception and making something out of that, but also having someone else's idea and filtering that. That's a very comfortable space for me. And so Wes's direction was pretty clear on what he wanted them to do, but we just couldn't quite figure out how. So it just was a question of coming up with that recipe of the how. But I have a strong feeling, and of course there's no way of knowing, that had I not gone to work on that film, I would have been doing something pretty similar anyway. I feel like work tends to kind of go in a rhythm of stepping away from the thing that you've done for a long time. So coming out of the eyes, which were this tiny, tiny, tiny little brushes and very, very precise work, I think doing something really big where I could use my body, where it was all about just completely instinctive mark making, was exactly the right thing. And so it's kind of worked for me, and so I've continued to do that.
You know, it's funny, the films of Pollock painting almost look like a dance, right? And I've noticed with some of the more abstract pieces where you're really putting your body into the painting, it looks like you must have been dancing. Like there's a kind of physicality to it that looks like, I mean, I'm assuming you were painting on the ground, right? You were not painting on the wall?
It was a mix. Most of it had to happen horizontally simply because of the amount of stuff that was going on that would have slid off if it had been vertical. But then it was always a switch, like 2 sessions flat, 1 session upright, 2 sessions, so that you could have drips, and they needed to look like they were painted on the wall. So there was a switch between the two. And towards the end, when they were loaded up, you needed 4 men to move one of them. So it was good to have a studio full of strong people around.
Were they on panels?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they had to be reinforced, right?
Just
because there was so much stuff on it.
Yeah. And the physicality was the key. I mean, that was really it. It was about, I don't know if dance is the thing, but it's definitely this energy that starts somewhere in your gut and goes through your body, and you just try and get the hell out of the way and let it come out your arm and into the paint as much as possible. And that's what you can do with big stuff. This is why painting large in many ways is much easier than painting small, because putting a lot of energy into something that size where you're having to put that much energy and attention into every mark is very, very difficult. Whereas if you can just go with a bucket full of paint, there'll be energy in there. Like that's an instant recipe like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny just thinking about this historically, you know, de Kooning, you know, Pollock, you know, so many of the abstract expressionists started as figurative painters, Guston included, then became non-objective, and then towards the end of their lives, the image of the figure started to emerge out of the work. Pollock was castigated for it, but de Kooning managed to sort of dodge that bullet somehow. And I think it happened late enough in Guston's life that people, even though he was criticized and actually had to change galleries in order to show the work, I think he still felt that there was enough support in the art world for what he was trying to do. And in fact, it presaged a lot of other figurative work that came after him. So it's interesting that Anderson wanted his artists to sort of go through a similar kind of transition, you know, and it almost makes you feel like, well, if there was a sequel to the movie, would he become a figurative artist again, you know?
Let's talk about the sequel to the movie. That'd be great. I'm out of a job otherwise. But as far as the abstractness goes, when we get the Rosenthalers up again, there are bodies in each of them. So we started out with models, drawing and photographing them, getting a lot of reference. I went and photographed Leia, who plays the muse in the film, and we mapped out a pretty precise nude on each panel with a projector before starting, and then slowly covered it in these layers of stuff. And again, it was not clear from the beginning how extreme the abstraction was going to be. This is one of the early Simone tests that didn't get selected, but one of my favorites. And whenever we got to the point where I would sort of write to Wes and say, what about this shoulder? It's just so nice. Shouldn't we keep it in there? Wouldn't it be nice to have a little bit of that body in there? He'd always say the same thing. He said, paint it out, Sandro, but I like that you know that it's in there. And I think that is something worth considering, because these things that we don't see really, really matter. I mean, they really kind of end up meaning something in the paintings.
I don't know enough about Wes Anderson to know this, but did he train as a painter at any point in his life?
No.
But so that's putting an enormous amount of trust in another visual artist, you know, who clearly has a kind of painterly approach to filmmaking. How do you suppose he had the confidence to know so specifically what he wanted from the Rosenthaler paintings?
He has the most extraordinary mind. He's a very, very wise and extraordinary artist, and also he has a pretty extensive knowledge of art history. I was there when he curated a beautiful, huge exhibition at the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, where he's selected with his wife Juman, I think something like 9,000 pieces from the various collections and made this incredible show. He knows art. He really, really does. I mean, he knows pretty much everything.
It's funny, there are some collectors, there are some curators, there's some writers that even if they don't have the experience of being a studio artist under their belt, they know the language, like somehow they just intuit it. You know, they don't actually have to be a practitioner to be able to talk like a practitioner. It sounds like he's one of them.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, and tell us a little bit more about, are there other film projects that you've worked on? And it just sounds like, I didn't realize that you know, were you like working like in Maya or one of the other 3D rendering
Never
programs?
done that, no. I'm way too attached to pencils on paper to do that. Even for Okja, when I was doing creature design effectively, I did it on a page with a pencil, and in retrospect possibly would have been much cleverer to do it that way. And then I gave those sketches to people who know how to do Maya, and they made it move around and do that kind of stuff. I think the key thing that I love about filmmaking is that it's collective effort, and it's really important to work with good people. And often on a good project you have a lot of good people, and it's this very different experience to being by yourself in the studio, just you and the painting or whatever, which is wonderful too. Maybe you've got a sitter, maybe you don't, but it's quite solitary. And if you're a social person and you thrive on interaction, which I think I do, then being a little cog in this big machine, which is, you know, all the caterers and the grips and the lighting people and the costume people and the hair people, and everyone's working together for that one moment when they call the roll and it all goes quiet and it all goes through the eye of the camera. That's very special and very worthwhile. And so the balance between occasionally doing film work and then going back to my own practice in the studio, it kind of scratches that itch for me of working collectively.
And when you say working collectively, in this particular case, it was for months, right?
Yeah.
And so at a certain point, were you itching just to get back into the studio and to have the privacy, or were you still really thriving on that communal experience?
I was throwing myself off the cliff and hoping that a net would appear. I had no time to think about going back to the studio. It was all about getting those things done before they were shot.
It looks like water down there, but there's no guarantee.
I'm trying to think what it was like afterwards. I've kind of blanked it. I have no memory of what happened afterwards. It definitely wasn't a sort of, oh my God, I can't wait to get back to my stuff. I was quite exhausted and sort of a bit empty afterwards, I think, and satisfied. It was good.
I mean, it's not unlike really putting a show together. You know, you work so hard and suddenly it goes up and you almost always have a deep depression afterwards. It's sort of like, well, that goal's gone, you know. If you're goal-oriented and suddenly it's taken away from you, it's like, well, now what do I do? I guess I'll clean the studio today and tomorrow and the day after. Can you talk a little bit about the atmosphere on a Wes Anderson set? I mean, the thing he seems so unique is that he seems to have almost more like a theater company mentality of like going back to the same players and having a crew that trusts. I mean, the level of trust must be extraordinary.
Yeah, he's worked out a way of running a film set that's very much his own. But what I was going to say is one thing that was really great was on top of having done the paintings, once they were done and we were spending a week shooting that big climactic hobby room scene, those who've seen the film know what I'm talking about, I got to be a little cameo as one of the artists. So I'm actually in the film as well, which meant that I also got to hang out in the room with my paintings for a week, installed and lit and finished, which was very, very satisfying. And the other thing was, it was a massive scene with, I don't know, a dozen cast and something like 100 extras. And so when the camera's looking the other way, there was quite a lot of downtime. So I would say, why don't you come behind this fake wall with me and I'll paint your eye? And there's lots and lots of eyes got done. Everyone who's in that scene pretty much got their eye painted because they had nothing better to do. Come and sit for me. It was very, very good. And the other thing that I remember from that was when the first day, that was the Monday, and we put the paintings in over the weekend, and they had this big camera move for the reveal of the 10 panels, and something went wrong with the camera arm. So usually the rhythm is pretty tight, but there was a 10-15 minute lull, and it gave me a chance to go up to Wes and go, what do you think? I finished that one. Do you think it's good? And he was like, oh, actually, could you change it? It's too much of a one broad shape. I kind of wanted it to be more different shapes. And I was like, well, how long have we got? And he said, how long have we got for the camera arm? And we had 10 minutes, so I ran for my palette, and I was up a ladder right up until the moment that we called the roll, in costume, sweating bullets,
oh my God.
finishing the paintings. So
I hope you had a line at least. No.
I got to scream. I got to have a gold tooth and scream in the showdown moment. That's it.
Did they pay you scale or more?
No comment.
No, okay, no comment. Okay, maybe it was a volunteer job, I'm not sure. So we're about at that time where we'd love to have some audience participation here. So are there any, I know there are friends and family in the audience. Any, Hannah?
Two things. First of all, not that this is relevant, my mum and grandma saw it and they said the whole scene with your paintings and the whole prison part of it, I'm obviously going to go and say it was just the best part of the film and so funny and so good and so clever. Anyway, that was the first thing.
Tell your mum her check will be in the post. I'll get make sure.
Yeah. Second thing, did you feel a weird non-attachment to it because you kind of had to be someone else, or did it feel like you were making your work? I just was thinking about your headspace, and was it quite freeing, feeling like this isn't actually me?
This is a question that I've had a number of times, and the answer is really no. It was my work, and if anything, it was extra pressure because it's not like you're working on the studio and you might have a show eventually. I knew these were going to have a show. People were really going to see them. So, and there was people have also asked, was there sort of a different character of Moses Rosenthaler that I was trying to channel? It was like, no. I was trying to do what Wes wanted me to do and do it as best as I could. So it was full attachment.
But it begs an interesting question too. I mean, because I've seen so many movies where art is presented or somebody presents an opening and there's always some guy with a mohawk. It's so cheesy how most Hollywood films look at the art world, but they're really asking for real art. They weren't asking for a facsimile. They wanted to have art with a capital A, and that's a huge difference. And the only other film I could think of was The Portrait of Dorian Gray, where Ivan Albright did these, beautiful paintings, one of which is in the Met's collection. It's it doesn't happen very often. They never hire the right person.
And another thing that irks me. Oh yes, we were going to be drinking.
We decided halfway through.
Cheers.
We could have
Sorry. We should have beers for everybody actually. Cheers.
David, do you want to fund that?
Yeah. In films, so often you see someone. In films about painters, you see them sort of have the moment of inspiration and go up to it and do a few marks and then smash cut to they step back, stroking their beard, and it's all finished. And I'm always really interested when you actually see people painting on film because, I don't know, maybe it's boring for others, but I find it fascinating. And there's a few, Ed Harris really painted for Pollock.
Those are pretty amazing, actually.
He did the work, and there's a few examples like that.
But he really trained himself. That's another unusual situation.
I forget what the question was, but anyway, I like painters in film, and I'm sure there are other examples we can think of where people have actually made paintings for film and on film. I mean, there was the Portrait of the Lady on Fire. That's a very, very good a contemporary artist who made those paintings and kind of also had to bend herself out of shape and make something that fit that slightly stiff.
It may have been Matt Mahern, I think.
It's definitely a woman. I don't know what her name is, but there's an article in Elephant magazine that I'm also speaking in where she's also interviewed, and I've forgotten her name. Sorry. But yeah, those are very, very good. And Clemente, of course, did art for film. So there are some, but they're few and far between.
Yeah. I think, Wilbur, do you have a question?
Hey.
Wilbur.
So when you were working on the film and you were asked to do these paintings and like Wes was asking you to do these particular things, all this experimentation that you were doing, did it like open up any new techniques or any like modes of making that actually you feel that you'll use in like in your future works and all that kind of stuff, because you were trying to achieve someone else's kind of like mastery or whatever, you know, so like you had to try and force yourself to try new things, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Rosenthaler way of painting is a method. It's a recipe, and I can repeat that recipe now, and I do frequently. There's a kind of pretty like 4-step approach to how they work.
Not to be a pill, but are they archival? I mean, it sounds like...
Very good question. This is one of the things that I banged on at length while we were there. The fact that they've made it from France to London, and they're like a truck's worth of painting. I sent Sian in to fix them up because some of them had cracked, and I know that they've since been reinforced. So it's a tentative yes. I would say so. I can't promise, but I think so. Ish. All the little ones that Sian did, the early Rosenthalers, which are the still life and the architectural one and the sleeping dog and so on, they're all proper oil paintings, and they should all be pretty lasting.
I mean, it's funny because there's so many materials, you know, anybody that's used an alkyd medium, you know, that always says on the bottle, non-yellowing, and then, you know, you leave it on a shelf for a year and it's practically black, you know. It's like, well, it didn't yellow, but it sure didn't stay the same color. I mean, but I think that that's true with almost any experimental material. It takes years for you to really be certain if it's stable. You know?
And to a certain degree, we have to embrace that. I mean, I found myself at the beginning of lockdown kind of unable to paint. It felt sort of perverse to make something as permanent as an oil painting when the whole world was just like whacked out, and who knew what was going to be happening. And so I was doing a lot of cleaning and a lot of bicycling and cooking, stuff like that. And it was this back door of using these non-archival, kind of crappy alcohol markers to do Zoom portraits of all the conversations that I was having anyway, catching up with friends since everyone was stuck at home. And I started to make these marker portraits, and there was, for me, something really soothing about the fact that they were not going to last. They were going to fade, they were going to go away, and I've since shown them and sold some of them, but it's like, it says non-archival. I hung them with the lighter ones towards the window to kind of make the point that these guys are going to fade, they're going to go away. It's okay. Stuff changes, you know. It's nice when stuff stays, but it's also okay when stuff changes.
Well, you know, those polka alchemical paintings, basically, they're acid. They're supposed to disappear within the course of 30 years. It's kind of wonderful. It's like, well, better take a photograph of it, you know. It's not sticking around. Carlos, you had a question. Yeah.
What is your favorite Wes Anderson film?
Darjeeling Limited.
Oh, and favorite Wes Anderson actor out of his whole cast that keeps repeating?
No comment.
Well, I have a particular fondness for Tilda Swinton, I have to say. But yeah, Darjeeling Limited, I think, is it's basically my favorite film. I watch it at least once a year. I think it's an absolute masterpiece. I think everyone in it is great. I love it.
Jed? Oh, sorry, I didn't know. Can you wait a second, Jed? Yeah.
Hi.
Hey.
So I actually had a question about this conversation that you were having a few minutes ago when you were asking about proving Sandro's genius. And then Sandro replied, well, don't forget that I was also being original. What, Sandro, is more important, you proving your painting genius or you being original?
Thank you. But I think that's really for other people to decide. I think the word genius is possibly slightly overused, and the character in the film had to be a genius, so it had to sort of be a convincingly fake genius. But there are some, I would count Wes as a genius. I certainly don't count myself as one, but I do like making pictures. And so I don't know if this is answering your question, but I think that this is something I can say. Whenever I'm really in a flow state and I'm doing something and the things are happening the way that they should and the energy's flowing, sometimes there's this tiny little glimpse of the best version of that thing that could possibly exist. There's this like glimpse of the sun behind the cloud where you just go, oh my God, I could make something really, really, really extraordinary. And whatever it is that you're making will always fall short of that. But if you can have that glimpse and kind of push yourself towards that a little bit further, that's what it's about. So I think that, is the kind of genius gap, is how close you can get to that gleaned. It's almost, Jung said archetypes can never be seen as themselves. They can only be seen as the emanations of the archetype. And it's like the archetype of a really good piece of art sometimes sits there in the back of your brain, and if you can just like open that crack up a tiny bit wider and get in there, then that's worthwhile.
Jed?
Yeah. So with the young Moses paintings that you did like early in his career, can you talk about how you came up with the compositions for those? Like there was hunger, there was drink, and I just thought that was a great part of the film.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that was actually a huge piece of work that I haven't spoken about much at all, and that was where Sian, our Sian here, came in very much into her strength. So in the script it had, young Moses is sitting in a train car, drinking cognac, drawing a dog with a sunflower field behind. So we knew that was what it was going to be. And Wes had some very, very clear ideas of what the vibe of those individual paintings was going to be. The sizes were set. They were all very, very small. And we spoke about those a lot. There was a lot of back and forth of emails for that as well. And for example, with the still life that he paints in the garret, I think there were at least a dozen versions of that as well that we made before it was sort of the finished one. And then when we had the finished one, for which we had to find some fresh cherries, because Wes wanted cherries in the still life. There were no cherries. It was November in France. So in the end, we found some red currants and we used those. And then there was a particularly yellow checkered tablecloth, which we went and sourced. And this was sort of all the fun stuff that went along with it. And also very interesting how originally we sort of tried to make paintings that look quite Wes Anderson in their layout, so very straight lines from the tablecloth with a fruit bowl in the middle and everything. And Wes was like, no, just let's make something different. Let's do something, let's have it on an angle, let's overemphasize the angle in there, and we made something that's very different. I mean, the abstracts as well, I think, are about as far away from what you could consider the Wes Anderson aesthetic, which is very managed and composed in an amazing way most of the time. And so I think there was a conscious effort to drive away from that. What else can I say about the little ones? The only one of those that's entirely mine is the self-portrait. Tony had to have the hair done and the makeup put on and everything. So we got up at 4 o'clock that morning and I painted him in the makeup room. Francis came in and made him up early so that we had an hour to paint before he then had to go to set and paint it. And I hand doubled for all the painting scenes. So that's my hand in all of them. I shaved my arm and I had my skin tone adjusted and then was splattered with paint and put my arm through his shoulder. And it was quite fun actually, because I could, of course, not see anything because his hair is this huge, and I had to feel the way it was wiping against my nose in order to be able to tell which way he was looking, because I couldn't be painting when he's looking at the model. So I had to kind of feel the hair swish this way, and then I do some painting. In the film, it ends up being a few seconds each time, so it's nothing, but it was a really great challenge. And then when we were doing the general, having made up my right hand to look like it, Wes suddenly said, you know what, the light's better the other way around. Have the camera over the other shoulder. So in 2 seconds we had to make my left hand the right one, and I painted that one with my left.
Ambidextrous. You're a switch hitter, that's great.
Very good practice. The left hand thing is something I've recently come back to. I bet you guys do that here at the live drawing. I find that a very, very helpful tool. Whenever I do live drawing, I try and spend the first 10 minutes or something drawing with my left hand, and then when you go back to right, things are much smoother.
It's like blind contour drawings, all those exercises, putting a 3-foot stick with a piece of charcoal at the end of it, sort of putting something that prevents you from becoming too, tight-assed. Really. So how did you find Sian, by the way, other than the fact that you were both living in Scotland?
I met Sian in Connecticut. She was 18, and she was Lynn Ramsey's assistant on We Need to Talk About Kevin. This is long before she came here, and we became friends then and sort of stayed in touch. And I saw she went here and was doing amazing work. And then when I had my Venice show to prepare, I said, will you come up and help me gild 106 eyes, which she did. And that was fun. We hung out and covered the entire floor of the studio in gold leaf, and the paintings got some as well. And so she was just the best obvious choice, because I knew she could do anything in terms of figurative painting that was thrown at her, but also she knew how a film set worked because she'd grown up with it. And so, yeah, she was great. She was there long before me. I mean, I think Edith and Sian arrived a week or two before I did and had everything kind of ready for me to come in, because I had a show in Bangladesh that I had to go to, and I was doing other stuff beforehand.
Yeah, it's funny, I only knew her for 2 years, but she never once mentioned that she was involved with filmmaking, because that's just who she is.
Yeah.
Very funny. Any other questions? All right. Audrey. Oh, no, Manuel, sorry.
I have a question about the eye thing. Like, I was pretty, shocked that you, made the eye on set. It's like you pull people from the thing. Like, do you carry around paints and panels? Or how'd that happen?
Everywhere. Yeah. In this instance, because I was kind of familiar with everyone there anyway, we'd been hanging out together for several weeks, it was very useful. I wouldn't, on any given film set, do that, but also on a West set generally there are no trailers, so when a cast member is not in front of the camera, there's a sort of collective hangout space where they can hang out, and so they're sort of available, and there's a lot of waiting around that happens on every film set. So if you have something vaguely interesting like sitting for a portrait to do, then that's quite a good opportunity. But it was to do with my particular relationship with that set that I felt comfortable enough to do that. I wouldn't usually rock up to Adrian Brody and just say, can you sit down for me?
Well, if there are no other questions, I think we are at the end of the evening. So, Sandro, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you all for coming out.